Hello and a very warm welcome to BhartaFirst. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Joining me on the program today are Vivek Karju, former ambassador, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times, and Professor Swaran, Singh School of International Studies, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. They're all great world powers, but yet they don't seem to find a simple solution to this problem. What's the crux of the issue, and what could that pragmatic solution be?
I think the most likely solution, how far that will be pragmatic, we will know in future, is that fundamentally President Zelensky will go back to Minsk protocol and agreement and resume, I would say, a dialogue with the rebels in eastern region, which is Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the so-called People's Republics. But it is not limited to that now. Putin has been able to use this crisis to lay out for the entire world, and many European leaders are today saying genuine, quote-unquote, concerns or security concerns of Russia. With constant 30 years of NATO's, as Ambassador Karju was saying, constant eastwards expansion of NATO, bringing with Ukraine NATO to the land borders of Russia. Even if it seems like Russia over years has been pushed to the wall, it seems in this specific crisis, Putin is looking for written security guarantees of removing some of the forward deployments, especially in the Eastern European countries, which are now NATO members, 4 of them, including 3 Baltic states, which were part of Soviet Union before. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, Ukraine is now trying to get out of this tight bend as soon as possible, because they are going to cave in first under multiple pressures. And not only with the money flying out, and people flying out, of course, every country is telling their nationals, including India, to exit Ukraine. So in that sense, the economic instability could be something that President Zelensky will have to face. It could also be the uncertainty. You heard recently the shelling in eastern sector. And both sides, as was expected, are blaming each other. Zelensky is saying that this is a provocation from Russian-supported rebels in Donetsk region here, Donbass region. But if you look at the kind of scripting that this whole crisis is increasingly looking like, it looks like scripted by President Putin. He is the senior most, longest serving head of state among all other leaders who he is dealing with. So interesting it is to see that one after another leaders are going to meet Putin. Then Putin going out to meet anybody. You could go back to June last year, summit with President Joe Biden, who flew to Europe to meet him. Of course, that was a fairly uncomfortable meeting. Both of them accused and blamed each other. Today, on the ground, very briefly, if you look at how the Ukraine is located, varying numbers of 100,000 to 150,000 to 170,000 troops of Russia are surrounding Ukraine from all sides. They don't need to invade. The pressure itself is going to cave in, make Kyiv cave in over a period of time. In the north, Belarus, entire north, east, south, eastern border with Russia. Now, of course, we also talk about the Crimea region, where some exercises are happening, troops are rotating. And we forget that, in Moldova, there is a Transnistria region on the southwest of Ukraine, where again, there are 1,000+ Russian soldiers deployed there. And you look at the experience dealing with Moldova, dealing with Georgia, dealing with the Crimea region. Putin has, over a period of time, built a certain credibility and strategy of dealing with these neighboring countries and sort of staying on with his forces in some of these spaces, even when other countries, particularly West, keeps on passing resolutions once in a while, saying that these are occupied territories. So in that sense, I think the pressure now is on Ukraine, but Putin is not trying to limit that crisis to simply revival of conversations between President Zelensky and the Russian, ethnic Russians in the eastern region of Ukraine. He's trying to build it bigger. And I think in that, not just this series of these shuttle diplomacy exchanges over a period of time, but most important is that Antony Blinken is on American request, remember, visiting Moscow coming week. And that is what Putin wanted. Putin wanted United States to sort of come in and sort of give certain kind of written security guarantees and not just verbal, because we keep hearing verbal security guarantees were given before. But last very quick 10 seconds point, I think the fundamental challenge that United States is facing today is the so-called relative decline, which has become a regular refrain for the last 10 years. And you notice whether it is China, Russia, invariably it is United States that makes a request for a meeting, and that showcases the difficulty of coming and accepting that new role that United States has, with increasingly most important NATO members are willing to sing their separate tune and talk to President Putin very separately. And that, I think, is something which is showing that the post the Cold War kind of international order is in enormous stress to be redefined in terms of what are the new equations, where several European nations are today saying we want to have an independent European security order, where their engagement with Russia is going to be completely different than the one that United States has had. So if United States is trying to live in past, I think then it is really going to lose in that increasing kind of synergy that Europe is building with Russia. And in that sense, I think that is something that United States has to over a period of time realize and then behave accordingly. And I think not just the Blinken meeting with Lavrov, but it should be followed hopefully with the Joe Biden's meeting with the President Putin to end this current state of the crisis. But tensions, of course, are not going to completely disappear. We have seen that in case of Moldova, Georgia, Crimea. Similar kind of confusion will continue over a period of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Professor, let me bring in another aspect into all of this now. So where does this leave India? Because like you mentioned earlier as well, all the other countries too have asked for their nationals to leave Ukraine. India has done the same too. So what does this mean for India?
I think it doesn't mean much, because I'm in touch with some Indian people in Kyiv, and the feedback I get is they are not in that panic of leaving Ukraine as perhaps the media here is making out to be. Some of them, of course, say that there are flight issues. Others are saying that we don't really feel that invasion is going to take place. So the panic for Indians in Kyiv is not very high in that sense. And they also feel that there are older Soviet linkages, and Indians are not really too unwelcome either by the Russians or by the Ukrainians. Multiple explanations, but fundamentally no panic as far as my feedback is concerned. But what is interesting to see here is this whole talk about volatility in international markets, the increasing pressure from United States that we should tell clearly which side we stand on, the fear that this conflict is pushing Russia towards China much more, or pushing United States away from Indo-Pacific, then both strengthening and giving free way to Chinese to do what they want to do in neighborhood. These are kind of issues that obviously concern India, but India has, if you remember, by abstaining in UN Security Council resolution on Ukraine on 29th of January, then the statement of Minister of External Affairs spokesperson on 31st January has clarified as to where it stands, and it basically stands on ideational principles of seeking peace through dialogue in that sense, and military should not be seen as a solution, etc. There is also conversation about energy, other than, as Pramit said, military being the strong component of the international stature of Russia. Energy is another important component of Russia's comprehensive national strength or power. And that is what links Russia increasingly to Germany particularly, but some other European countries also. And in post-pandemic resilience, they, I think, understand the dependence that they have on Russian gas. And so also Russia has a dependence on Europe for investments and trade to ensure certain resilience in that sense, to continue that kind of post-pandemic growth of their economies. So I think it's more a matter of India, calculating the costs of sustaining that neutrality. Otherwise, India's imports from Russia, when it comes to energy, are less than 1%. And indeed, for Russia, India is a client state for energy lower than 0.2%. So that energy connect, of course, we have had important investments in Vladivostok area, but in terms of supply and demand of energy between Russia and India, it's not too much. As far as defense connect is concerned, let's look at the worst case scenario of an invasion happening. I'm not the one who believes that invasion will happen, because if you look at last 20 years of President Putin, that's not how he operates. But worst case scenario, as Western reports, intelligence reports, both have become laughable now. It's part of social media jokes now that Russians are saying, please tell us the date of invasion so that we can plan our holidays, etc., etc. But let's say worst case scenario, invasion takes place. That is only going to give boost to the Russian military industrial complex. Remember what happened after the first Persian Gulf War, consort of Willing. American defense exports went up after that. So in that sense, that is only going to make Russian military industrial complex robust. But that is something I'm not anticipating that is likely to happen. It could at best delay some of the imports of India, including S-400, because of not just supplies of the military industrial complex of Russia focusing on Ukraine, but also India becoming and Russia becoming much more sensitive to choice between United States and Russia, and United States being little more on the edge if India continuously imports S-400, which they have clearly declared would invite sanctions. So in that sense, those are minor issues that could be concerns for India. I don't think there is too much to worry other than simply calculating the costs of sustaining that neutral position over a period of time. My sense is within next 2 weeks, we will see some breakthrough. So India will not have to wait far too long.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, it's time to get quick closing remarks.
I think I agree with the ambassador. It's primarily domestic factors of, as Pramit said, falling popularity ratings after pandemic raging continuously, economy not picking up again, unemployment, and of course disaster in Afghanistan, but increasingly also the disunity which is becoming visible within NATO, and NATO undergirds United States being the global power. And in that sense, these are kind of knee-jerk reactions to the multiple crises that in that sense Biden administration is facing. What is equally telling is the interview that Ukrainian ambassador Perestyko gave to BBC about 3 days back. He said, given the fact that we are being blackmailed, we are under enormous pressure, panic buttons are being triggered all across Ukraine, we might ultimately be willing to show flexibility as far as membership of NATO is concerned. So you could not have a more clearer kind of outline given by a diplomat than saying that we are almost ready to talk to President Putin and say, oh, that's it, and we will not be interested in participating, joining either European Union or NATO, but we want to get out of this tight band in which we are. But Putin is no longer looking for that revival of dialogue within Ukraine. He's looking at his own security guarantees. And for that, the fact that Lavrov is going to meet in Moscow Antony Blinken, I think is a good start. After all the, as the chorus singers of Europe, as Ambassador mentioned them, they are not the lead singers. They have already paid obeisance, I'm using a very harsh word intentionally, to that talk with Putin across the long 11-foot table. Now it is the talk between direct Biden administration and Putin regime. And I think that is something which is a good sign, and Putin wanted that kind of dialogue to begin. And to me, that is a good sign. And all the pressure points will continue to be there. They will not disappear because dialogue has not come to a conclusion as of now. So within that, I agree with Pramit. Maybe worst case scenario could be some kind of a covert operation or help or assistance through those rebels, ethnic Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine. We already heard of some shelling. They will keep blaming each other without anybody owning up. We saw what happened in Crimea. Russia doesn't own up these things for a long period of time. So on the ground, I think that kind of chaotic status quo will persist over a period of time. But the current episode of crisis is something that we are looking at certain conclusion. Whether that conclusion will get put in the security guarantees in written form, that is something yet to see, whether it will come as a written document or a press statement. We don't know how, but Putin is actually working hard in that direction to get that security guarantees of removal of some of these deployment, NATO deployments in Eastern Europe and Baltic states. And of course, some kind of an indication that NATO is not reaching Russia's land borders by making Ukraine join it as a member. So some kind of conclusion that Putin is looking at. How far he is going to get it, we are yet to see. But I think they're moving step by step in that direction now.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us.